The following are two real-life stories of haunted houses witnessed by the residents who resided there. Carlton Colville. The coastal town of Carlton Colville is in the suburbs of Lowestoft in East Suffolk, UK, and it is where the following ghost story took place at the turn of the 20th century. James and Anna Smith were very young boys who lived in a cottage on Beccles Road. Their hard-working parents had to spend most of the day working on the land, and times were very hard. As the boys had not reached school age, they needed to be cared for while their parents were out working. A kindly neighbour by the name of Mrs. Handley took it upon herself to care for the young boys, and after a while treated them as if they were her own children. She had a strong motherly instinct and gave the boys much love and attention, and would spend most of the day attending to their every needs. Mrs. Handley was fanatical about keeping the house tidy, and when the boys had finished playing with the toys, she would immediately pack them away into the cupboard, which stood against the wall on the opposite side of the bed. When Mrs. Handley cleaned up, she made a lot of noise, and the boys had strong memories of the banging that she would make as she opened and closed cupboards and would slam the drawers while putting away their clothes. The boys shared a double bed, and she would tuck them in every night and stand at the foot of the bed with her arms crossed and would not leave until they were fast asleep. Mrs. Handley was an elderly lady, and when the boys were 12 and 14, she passed away, leaving the boys extremely upset, and it felt as if they'd lost their own grandmother. It was after Mrs. Handley's passing that weird things started to happen around the cottage, where they would continue to see and feel Mrs. Handley's presence. Even in their late teens, where they still shared the double bed, they continued to see Mrs. Handley standing at the foot of the bed looking over them, with her arms folded and a smile on her face, just as she'd done when they were young boys. But it was not only Mrs. Handley manifesting in front of them that was strange, but they would regularly hear things such as the opening and closing of cupboard doors, and drawers being opened and closed, accompanied by banging noises. It was as if Mrs. Handley was still doing the housework and cleaning up. When this was happening, they could hear her, but could not see her. At other times, objects would be moved out of the cupboard and placed elsewhere in the room, and would be lifted up and down. James said that although they would not admit to actual fear when they saw her apparition, nonetheless they did grab each other's hand, as they observed her ghostly presence in the room as she looked at them from the foot of the bed. They claimed that Mrs. Handley's presence was at the cottage even 10 years after her passing. Many years later, when James recollected this series of unusual events, he said that they were not really frightened by the presence of Mrs. Handley because they'd never experienced a ghost before in their life and could not understand how she could appear at the foot of the bed when they knew she had passed. When the family left the cottage, there was no evidence of the ghost following them or even reappearing. It seems that Mrs. Handley had finished her work and her responsibilities to the boys, and she could finally move on. Her incredibly strong emotional ties to the boys had kept her at the cottage long after her passing, and there was no way she was going to leave it until her important task had ended. Both boys went on to serve in World War I, and fortunately both survived the war. Maybe on the battlefields of France and Belgium, Mrs. Handley had maybe acted as their guardian angel and protected them in some way to ensure they came back home to Carlton Colville. Gill House. Gill House in Cumberland, UK dates back to the early 13th century. During World War II, the Women's Land Army was based there, and they would tell stories about the terrifying incidents that had taken place while they resided there. The women had not long settled into their new surroundings when they would hear strange noises coming from a bedroom that was located in the oldest part of the building. Exterminators were called in, and it was initially believed that the strange sounds were caused by scurrying rats, but they found no trace of any vermin. Over a period of time, the sounds got louder, and then they started to hear the sound of footsteps. Events then started to escalate when young women, who were now sleeping in the room where the noises were coming from, had the feeling they were being choked and refused to stay there. One of the officers from the Land Army, Miss Uselby, sent investigators to check on the serious allegations. The investigators included Reverend N.C. Murray and his wife, and Mrs. Parkins, and they were to report any strange events to a warden by the name of Miss Mandale. As they entered the room, they initially found nothing out of the ordinary, until Mrs. Murray suggested stirring things up by tapping. Mrs. Parkins then started tapping loudly on the cupboard. At first, it appeared to have no effect. Then suddenly they heard a rustling sound, and then a figure of a man appeared out of the cupboard and headed straight to Mrs. Parkins and stopped next to her. This was accompanied by the sound of a fishing reel which everyone in the room could hear, and then Mrs. Parkins felt an intense coldness as the figure stood next to her. The figure then walked towards Mrs. Murray and started tapping on the wall, making a metallic sound. Then everyone in the room was confronted by a putrid, decaying smell. The figure continued tapping on the walls for the following 3 hours until it abruptly stopped and the figure returned to the cupboard from whence it came. Then everything fell silent and they all left the room. The team reported to Miss Mandel that there is no doubt that the room is haunted and suggested nobody stay in the room. The team was now intrigued at what they'd observed and brought out an Ouija board to delve a bit deeper into the strange events that had just taken place. They made progress when they were able to get the names of the 2 spirits, but the names of Gerald Ray and his servant Lily. Gerald claimed to have been a Jacobite during the reign of George I in the 18th century. Judging by what his spirit had relayed to the team, it appears that Gerald was a wicked man when he was alive and had stolen sacred relics that had hidden in Gill House. They also held seances where it was revealed that the house contained many evil spirits and they should leave well alone. A clairvoyant even visited the premises and told them that she detected 2 ghosts. One was a man wearing tight trousers and the other was a girl, which verified what had been earlier discovered. After this series of frightening events, none of the women in the land army would stay at the house. Miss Mandel claimed that there was nothing to be concerned about, and she and Mrs. Howe, who was a Cumberland County Women's Land Army organiser, would stay at the house overnight. The 2 women would never see the night out and left after a few hours in a disturbed state. Mrs. Howe claimed to have had 3 terrifying experiences that had put her in a state of panic. She duly recommended no women in the land army stay there and had the place closed down.